G'day. What does an F1 driver get up to in the 60 minutes prior to the start of a Formula One race? Well, I know, and in about 10 minutes, so too will you. Let's take a typical 2 p.m. F1 race start and then go back 60 minutes. Where will we find an F1 driver? Most probably in their driver's room. In the Euro races, that room will be in the hospitality suite. In the flyaways, it could be in a tent like in Australia, Baku, Las Vegas or Japan, or in a purpose-built team suite like in Abu Dhabi, China and Qatar. Now this is by no means some lavish suite. This can be as small as say 10 square metres, might be as big as 40. It'll probably contain a massage table, a rack or a wardrobe, plus some drawers for the driver's gear, perhaps a desk, and probably some stuff will be stuck on the walls for motivation. Now at 1 p.m. the trainer would have already provided the drink to the engineers for the driver, and that's based on a weight provided to him by the engineers. If they tell a driver, say, look, you've got 300 millilitres of fluid that you can have in the car, and the trainer says, no, he needs 700, then there has to be a discussion, and typically I understand the drivers win out in that respect. And that drink is put in as late as possible, probably 12:40 p.m, because the driver's seat has to go in shortly thereafter. We've already had the drivers' parade. That happened at 1 p.m, and not always a parade too, because tracks like Qatar, Baku and Bahrain, where there are no spectators at the far ends of the track, they don't do the tour. Instead, they do a presentation out on pit lane. So what is that driver doing in their room at 1 p.m? They might still be relaxing. They could be dressing for the event, in which case they'll be putting on their fireproof underwear, their race suit, not buttoned up, but certainly tied around their waist, their fireproof socks and shoes, but they wouldn't have put on those knee pads. That comes later when they get to the garage. There might even be some warming up going on. Pierre Gasly, often seen with his trainer doing the ball drop. Charles Leclerc might be skipping rope or kicking a soccer ball around. And at some point, they'll probably go to the toilet. Oh, and by the way, I've just been alerted that some of you aren't subscribed yet. Could you please hit the subscribe button? And I'll continue on. At 1:10 p.m, and bear in mind this is different for each driver, but it's around the mark. They'll head to the garage. They'll probably stop for a selfie or two, maybe even an autograph. But pretty much it's straight to the garage where they will get in there, have a chat with their engineer, and then go to the rear of the garage, perhaps to their cabinet or a shelf, and put on the rest of their kit, being the balaclava, helmet, hands device. Oh, before they do that, yes, they do need to be weighed. What is the purpose of that? Well, if their weight needs to be 74.1 kilos and they only weigh 73, the team then has to put 1.1 kilograms of ballast in the car, just weight. You cannot race underweight. It's okay to be overweight, but you cannot be underweight. And you might remember that George Russell last year won the race and then had it taken off him because his car was too light. And that will break your heart, having done all that work. Then the driver moves to the car, where sometimes a little step is ready for him. He will enter the car, and one or two of the mechanics will strap that driver in. Typically, it is the number one mechanic or the front mechanic. So in Charles Leclerc's case, it would be Alessandro Fusaro. Then the headrest and the steering wheel are put in place, and then comes the screen. That's put in front of the driver. Now, what's on that screen? No, it's definitely not that, but it could be data or data as the Americans call it, from the driver's race sim in one of the practice sessions. It might be onboard cameras from the safety car doing their final laps, or whatever the driver wants to look at or the team wants to reinforce. There'll be a radio check, and in those minutes, a driver can be found practicing their starts, not with the wheels spinning because they're in a garage, but it could well be just that they practice their clutch drop. They could be aiming, say, for a 40% clutch drop, and if they nail it time after time, and they'll get to see that data on the screen, the team can confidently set everything up around the certainty of him nailing that 40% mark. At 1:17 p.m, no one is allowed to cross pit lane unless they are a garage mechanic. So for the likes of us, being media, we're not allowed to cross, either to the grid or from the grid. And then 3 minutes later at 1:20, the green lights go on for pit lane and the cars can then exit. So a driver's been waved out of the garage by his mechanic. He will head up to that line, pass it, then he'll do a number of laps. But remember, out on pit straight, you've got a whole host of people, you've got all of the team's gear, so the cars can't drive down the straight. Instead, they have to slow and go through pit lane again. And typically they'll do 3 to 5 passes down pit lane before one of two things happens. One, the team says, right, that's enough, and they go to the back of the grid, or pit lane is closed, in which case they're ordered to go to the back of the grid. Oh, and pit lane is closed at 1:30 p.m. Coming onto the grid, the drivers will be keeping an eye out for their crew. They'll be looking for the guy with the front jack, they'll be looking for the fellows with the blowers that cool the engines. They'll find those guys, stop, and of course there's media everywhere around taking photos, and that's the reason we can get these sort of amazing pics when it looks like we are standing on the track with a car coming towards us, and that is indeed exactly what is happening. So the cars go onto the dollies and they're wheeled back through the grid and they find their spot. Of course, one of the crew walks ahead of each car just to warn those people not paying attention that there is a car coming behind that is not easy to stop. Then the driver alights from the car. He goes typically and speaks to his trainer, who takes off his helmet, balaclava, puts it down on the side of the track and gives him a watch and a cap. Then they go and speak to their engineer. Now that typically doesn't last longer than a couple of minutes, and then it's back to the garage where they can either sit quietly on one of the mechanics' chairs, which have been already placed in the garage now that the car's gone, or they might head out to the toilet for a quick break. What the drivers will hear, though, through the PA system while they're sitting in that garage is the countdown to the national anthem. There are public address messages every couple of minutes alerting drivers to how many minutes to go before they're required on the grid. Now, you may not know this, and I only found out the other day, but early last year, they moved the anthem time back 2 minutes from 1:46 to 1:44. Why? Well, the Drivers' Association lobbied for that and said it just gave the drivers a little bit more time to get their stuff done prior to a race start. But getting back to those PA messages, does that ensure each driver is there on time? Well, it certainly helps, but no, I often see drivers sprinting along pit lane late for the national anthem, and I believe last year Yuki Tsunoda even got fined €10,000 for being late to one of those national anthems. Once the drivers are assembled for the national anthem and their names are placed on the ground so every driver knows where to stand, it plays and it typically lasts for less than a minute. Then the drivers are cleared to go back to their car or go back to their garage. They'll walk back along the straight past all the cars, go out a middle gate and perhaps back to their garage for a last minute wee. But in some tracks, and I'll give you one example, Monaco, they can't actually get back through the crowd because it's so busy. So instead they walk forwards, past the start line, turn right and come back down pit lane to make the toilets. And in places like Brazil and Australia, the drivers use the same toilets as the Paddock Club guests. So you could have paid many thousands of dollars for your tickets, and guys, you will go to the toilet, you'll be standing at the urinal, and then next thing you know, in walks your favourite driver and has a wee next to you. But what happens if there's a queue? Would a driver have to queue? No, typically their security or their trainer will have accompanied them and they'll just say, look, we've got a driver here, can we go to the head of the queue? And I don't think I've ever heard of anyone say, no, you go to the back like the rest of us. And something I noticed early on in Charles Leclerc's career, particularly the first season he did with Ferrari, he would often just sit next to his car and not go back to the garage after either getting out of his car or after the national anthem, which I thought was rather odd. And really, when you saw the number of media, cameramen, photographers, interviewers around him, it was crazy. But today, that's changed. Certainly, if you're an F2 driver, you don't go back to the garage between getting out of your car and a race start. That is something reserved only for F1, and I guess because it's so busy on the grid. At 1:50 p.m, the drivers then put on their balaclava, their helmets, their hands device. They get in the car, they put their gloves on, and they sit and wait. At 1:55, their trainers leave. Now, if they need a cooling fan, that will be left perhaps on the chassis. If they need a drink bottle, that'll be left also somewhere easily reachable by the driver, but that trainer will then leave the track. Those two items are then the responsibility of the engineers and mechanics to take away. At 1:58 p.m, all of that stuff is moved away along with the crews standing either side of the track behind the white line, and the driver has just shy of 2 minutes sitting in the car with it running, thinking about life and the upcoming race. These red lights up here indicate how many minutes before the drivers can take off on their formation lap, and when those lights go out, they are allowed to take off. And they don't do it at any great speed. And the purpose of that formation lap is to just set everything up finally for the race start. While they're off doing their lap, the crews are racing to get off the track. Those huge big gates are then locked, and if there's a car that for some reason hasn't started, that too is brought off the track and has to start from pit lane. That formation lap can take a few minutes, depending on how fast these cars go, and there's no great rush for them to get back. And certainly the cars at the rear of the grid take their time because they know the ones at the front have been stuck standing still for longer than they would have liked. How do they find their box? Well, there are signs positioned all the way along the track with the driver's first three initials to indicate where they should stop. And also some drivers have the advantage of a piece of gaffer tape which has been stuck on the wall of the straight by one of their crew, and that allows them to line up, say, a mirror with that piece of tape and know that they're in the exact right spot for the start. Up the back, the safety car comes to a stop behind the field, then a marshal waves a green flag as he walks from one side to the other, the red lights count up to 5, and then the starter hits the start button.
And it's lights out and away we go.
Oh, what if you can't see the lights from your spot on the grid? Well, there is a second set of starting lights in a different position, which gives you two options. So the race start actually takes place, not at 2 p.m, but at about 2:03. There you have it. What goes on 60 minutes prior to the start of a Formula One race these days. An array of my best picks from 24 are in this 2025 calendar, and there are 2 different sizes of my best of 2024 photo books, all available from kimellman.com. Before you go, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. No, that's all wrong.